Hello everyone, Michael here. Today I have another bonus video. If you've been following this channel for a while, or if you're participating in our Discord server, you might be aware that one of our favorite binaural rendering plugins is APL Virtuoso. Well, today APL, which by the way stands for Applied Psychoacoustics Lab, released version 2 of Virtuoso, and it comes with a couple of new and very interesting features. And at least one of those features was completely unexpected, at least for me. So let's check out Virtuoso 2 and what it has to offer. Before I get started, a quick disclaimer. APL provided me with a free license for Virtuoso, but they did not ask me to make a video and have no input in what I'm going to say today. I should also mention that Virtuoso 2 is a free update, so if you already own version 1 of Virtuoso, you can simply go to their website and download version 2 for free. And finally, a quick reminder, if you want to stay informed about everything spatial audio, I invite you to join our free Discord server. Invite link is in the description below, and with that being said, let's jump into today's session and load up Virtuoso 2. Now I've decided to work with Studio One today. This, by the way, is still Studio One version 6. I'm recording this video before Studio One version 7 came out. Doesn't make any difference though. All we really need is the capability of Studio One to have multi-channel output, and we're going to use a Dolby Atmos setup. And what I'm going to use here is an example that I used in a previous video, actually a couple of previous videos. Let's just have a brief listen. And we have the objects and the bed distributed across the three-dimensional space. So the kick, for example, is here in the front. And this is the synth. The synth is behind me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Virtuoso. Now, if you are not familiar with Virtuoso, what Virtuoso is, it is a binaural rendering plugin. So you can take in multi-channel audio and convert it into binaural, and then can do that in a way that, for example, also allows head tracking. If you are, once again, not familiar with Virtuoso, I'm going to leave some links in the description where I go through the details. In this video, I really only want to talk about the things that are new with Virtuoso. Now, there's one additional thing I should mention, and that is that everything that I'm going to show today, even though I'm working on a Mac, works on Windows almost the same way. There's just one exception. I'm going to talk about that once we get there. But kind of don't let yourself discouraged by the fact that I'm using a Mac today. Most of the things work in Windows in exactly the same way. So let's add Virtuoso to our setup, and the way this is set up here is that I have the Dolby Atmos renderer rendering into a stereo output. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to switch that over into 7.1.4. I'm going to use 7.1.4 simply because it's sort of the standard way to set that up, but you could actually go to higher channel count, so you could go up to 9.1.6, for example. So I'm going to choose the output format to be here 7.1.4. I'm going to say OK. This then switches the Dolby Atmos renderer over to 7.1.4. Now I still have a stereo main output. That means that if I play that now, it's going to sound a little bit off. As you can hear, essentially kind of the two stereo channels, the left and the right channels, are really, really dominant. That's where the kick was. So what we need to do is we need to turn that into something that is rendered binaurally, and the best way to do that is with Virtuoso. Now, there are different ways in how I could do that. I could, for example, put Virtuoso on a listen bus, but I'm going to do the simplest way here, and I'm simply going to add that to the main master bus in Studio One. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a post insert here in the master bus, and let's just add that here, and let's just search for Virtuoso. Here we are. I'm going to use the VST3 version. Doesn't make any difference. This is going to open up Virtuoso. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the input configuration. And once again, this is a binaural rendering plugin. So essentially, the way this would work is you would set up the input, what signal you're expecting, and then this plugin would turn that into binaural audio. And for that, the first thing I need to do is I need to switch over the input configuration. So I'm going to switch that over to what we have here is 7.1.4a, and this will then essentially show you the speaker layout. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the settings because most of the settings are fairly intact. So we can, for example, in the settings tab, do a couple of different things. We can select how the channel mapping is done. We can select any down mixes we want to do, and a couple of things. I'm going to focus on the things that are new here. And the first thing that's new is that APL included two new HRTFs, so head-related transfer functions. These are D and E. I would recommend that you try them out. Kind of if you like them, great. I personally am not that big of a fan of these head-related transfer functions because they never work for me, but they might work for you, so kind of give them a try. My understanding is that they were built on some of the head-related transfer functions that Meta is using, but kind of just give them a try and see if that works for you. So the second thing that is new is, and that's actually an interesting one, as if we go into the head tracking section, currently I have that set to manual, meaning that I'm not really doing any head tracking, and I did a couple of videos actually about how that works. So if you're interested in how to use head tracking with Virtuoso, I'm going to once again leave links in the description below. But what you can do is you can set it over to automatic, and that would essentially then take in the head tracking from a head tracker and put that into Virtuoso correctly so that you get a real 3D experience. And the one thing that they did is they included a new option here, and this new option here is Odyssey, and that is the head tracking for the Odyssey Maxwell. So if you have the Odyssey Maxwell headphones, you can now natively use them with Virtuoso, which is really cool. Now, I did a review of the Odyssey Maxwell, and it turns out that I have a really big head, and the Odyssey Maxwell did not fit me well, so I passed them on to my son, who is now using them as his main gaming headset. I don't have them anymore, so I couldn't test it, but my assumption is that it works just fine. I personally prefer to work with other head trackers that essentially require a setup via OSC, but kind of if you have the Odyssey Maxwell and you like them, kind of you can use them here. So the next thing that is new is here in the headphone EQ section, and one thing that you can do now is, and that opens up all the options that you have in order to set up the EQ for the headset. You have this new custom tag, and what that allows you to do is you can go here into the HBC, the headphone EQs, and you now have a 10-band EQ that you can configure manually. So let me just kind of play the audio. So you can essentially see that we have the 7.1.4 coming in here, and it's converting that into binaural. And we can now, kind of custom tune to our particular headset. So let me maybe kind of do the 7, and yeah, let's if I moved it up. So you can create your own EQ profile, which is really, really, really cool. Now, the final thing that you can do here in the plugin is in the view settings, you now have limited options on how to navigate this three-dimensional space. In previous versions, this is essentially what you had and what you were stuck with. Now you can actually kind of move around a little. I can only move up, down for some reason, but that's fine. And I can also zoom in. Now, the zoom function functions with the mouse wheel, and that doesn't really work on a Mac with a trackpad. So if you're sitting on a Mac that has a trackpad, be aware that it doesn't work. You need actually a mouse with a mouse wheel to do that. And the final thing that you can do in this 3D view is you can now right-click on one of the speakers, and you can solo it, or you can mute it. Well, now I'm soloing and muting at the same time. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that essentially allows you to simply check how certain speakers sound in your particular configuration. So this is actually really, really cool. A really nice update to Virtuoso that gives us a couple of additional features that I think are really useful. But one particular feature is, and let me just turn off the audio for a second here. One particular feature you can only find in the standalone version of Virtuoso, and this is actually the most interesting one. So let's switch over to the standalone version. So let me open the standalone version here, and I need to find it among our many, many different plugins. Here we have it, the standalone version. And if you're not familiar with the standalone version, it's essentially the same thing. The only difference is, or the main difference is, that it's now not used as a plugin. What it is used instead is a standalone application that can take in multi-channel audio and then convert it into binaural and send it to your output. So the first thing in the standalone version, what you need to do is you need to configure the audio settings. Now, in my particular case, I need to set the output actually to the Rodecaster so that you guys hear something. And then the input you would set to wherever the audio is coming in. I'm going to leave it the way it is right now. But on a Mac, what you would do is you would kind of select one of the virtual kind of devices that you have. So for example, if you're working with Pro Tools, you can use one of the Pro Tools audio bridges, or if you're working with any other tool, you can do that as well. I usually use a loopback 16-channel input. That's usually what I do, but that's completely up to you. Now, this is the one thing where Virtuoso works differently in Windows. You can technically do the same thing in Windows as well. However, the configuration is a little bit more complicated because Windows is not as easy working with virtual devices. So you can still do exactly the same thing. You probably need to use something like VB Matrix or maybe check audio routing, something like that. But it should work. But it's not as straightforward as on a Mac. This is one of the reasons actually why I tend to use Macs in these videos. Now, the thing that's really interesting and that's really new is this additional section down here, and that you see open file. So Virtuoso now also includes a player, and this is actually a player for ADM files. So this can actually play Dolby Atmos master files. And in order to demonstrate that, let me first create one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Studio One, and I'm going to export spatial audio here. Just kind of leave everything the way it is. It's exporting that. That's fine. So we now have that here. And then let's go back to Virtuoso and let's open that file here. So it's sitting on the desktop here. Let's open that. So let's play our audio and see if everything works correctly. Now, the one thing that you need to make sure is that the input is set here to player. So if you have it on device, set it over to player. And that essentially means it's going to take in the audio from the file that you've loaded in and is going to play that. So if you press play now, we essentially hear the Dolby Atmos master file. Now, the interesting thing is that this is actually decoded in a two-step process. It first takes in the Dolby Atmos master file and converts it to whatever speaker layout you have selected. And then in a second step, it's going to take the speaker layout that you have and it's going to convert it into binaural with the head tracking that you have enabled, if you have head tracking enabled. That essentially means that you can actually switch out the speaker layout. So you can, for example, binaurally monitor not only the 7.1.4 layout, you could switch it over to, let's do something else, 9.1.6, for example. And what you could get now is a binaural rendering of a 9.1.6 speaker layout. Now, this is not necessarily something that I had actually expected, to be perfectly honest. I didn't think that somebody would do that. I'm honestly not entirely sure how useful that is, but it's an interesting feature. It's very interesting, actually, that the feature should allow you to monitor different speaker layouts binaurally with your Dolby Atmos master file. Now, the one thing that you can also do is you can load in re-render. So if you have, for example, re-rendered that in 9.1.6, you can load that file in as well and play it back. However, if you do that, make sure that you have the correct speaker layout selected, because it's not going to automatically adapt that to a different speaker layout. So here we go, Virtuoso version 2. I think this is really a very interesting update to the binaural rendering plugin that was already considered one of the best on the market today. The ability to load ADM files into the standalone version of Virtuoso is super interesting, but I'm honestly not completely sure about the use cases, given that there is the intermediate step of converting the ADM into multi-channel form and then from there into binaural. I would really be interested in your opinions about this one. Do you think this feature is useful? Would it, for example, allow you to test your tracks on different speaker layouts without actually having those speaker layouts physically available to you? I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts about that. But that's everything I wanted to say today. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. And with that being said, I'll see you all in the next video.